Joining me today from across the pond is an author whose work includes multiple #1 bestsellers, a wildly successful children's book that will be hitting the big screen later this year, and novels like The Midnight Library that stuck with me in the very best way. And if you're looking for some comfort in your life, he literally just released the book on that. Matt Haig, welcome to the middle.
Hi, Ashley. It's very, very nice to be here, and it's lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's start with the comfort book. Congratulations. I listened to it and then I bought a physical copy to keep on my nightstand when I need a boost. So for
Oh,
those
wow.
who,
You've listened to it. Wow.
yes,
Is
which
that
I
that,
love
that
that
means
it's
you've
your voice.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I feel sorry for you. I recorded that in my daughter's bedroom, and we had to make it like a studio by having lots of, because with audiobooks the quality has to just be so
I bet.
precise. Any little sound, it has to be, because it's a book, it's not a podcast, it has to sound, just
Right,
like pristine. I mean, podcasts have a more natural flow.
right.
I'm definitely not dissing podcasts, but the audio,
It's a
yeah, so
production.
it was a nightmare. And but I don't like the sound of my own voice, and I've been asked 3 times now to do my own audiobooks. And yeah, so I was reading about comfort and talking about comfort while also feeling incredibly
Totally uncomfortable.
uncomfortable.
Well, I
Trying to
never
get
would
that.
have known. And I will say, I really appreciate the speed of your voice
Oh,
because
okay.
normally I speed up my audiobooks like at least like 1.25.
Oh,
And
really?
I put it back to normal. So we're on the same page there. I love
Okay, yeah, but that's just because I'm just like, I want it done.
it. Yeah. So for those who haven't read it, tell me a little bit about the comfort book.
Well, the comfort book is basically what it says on the can. It's basically a book of comforting things that have comforted me, things I've learned through my experience of mental illness and recovery, through just general life anecdotes, through inspiring figures, historical figures that have inspired me, all kinds of little potted life stories in there. Woman who's lost in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. You've got Steve Callahan, the guy who was adrift at sea for 72 days. You've got, Maya Angelou, various little potted stories alongside lots of aphorisms and comforting phrases and thoughts I've had, my own words, other people's words, quotations. And it's a book you can read in any order. You could open it up at page 79 and get, you wouldn't have to have read page 78. It's I wanted a book that wasn't just about comfort, but that actually felt comforting in the form of it. It's very easy, very simple, very accessible. This came about actually in March 2020, when obviously the news is still pretty catastrophic, but March 2020, it felt, like we were heading for this juggernaut of a pandemic, and which we obviously were, but everything was sort of like very foreboding and catastrophic. So I was wanting to write almost the exact opposite of how the world and the news was making me feel, and to sort of offer a counterbalance. I just finished writing The Midnight Library. I had this kind of nervous energy and all this sort of world stuff, so I tried to write myself into calmness, and the comfort book was kind of my self-therapy, I suppose, and always hoping it's going to have a similar effect on other people as I write
It
it.
absolutely has for me, and I'm sure it has for anyone. Like, for example, yesterday my car just stopped working, and anytime that happens, it's like everything is ruined. The whole day is ruined. So I turned on the audiobook and I'm like, it's gonna be fine. So I appreciate that.
Okay.
So
Oh, yeah.
for you, I thought,
Yeah.
did I see on your Instagram that you said people gave you criticism prior to releasing this one?
I was anticipating, like, I felt, because British people actually are very strange people, and I'm a British strange person myself. But we're kind of we're a very cynical. There's a cynical strand, certainly in literary culture, among literary newspaper kind of reviewers, where anything optimistic or hopeful or accessible or clear and simple is almost treated with a bit of suspicion. It's a bit, something to look down on. I'm sure America has it to a degree. I'm sure there's a kind of New York publishing feel where you have a hierarchy of books. But in Britain, it's so particularly marked, the sort of class system of books. And I've always, all my career, I've kind of tried to resist playing that game of like, literary books versus commercial books, highbrow versus lowbrow. I try and ignore all kinds of categories exist, even categories of like self-help or whatever. I try and forget the type of book I'm writing every time. That's my only kind of rule. I imagine no book's ever been written, and like if you were just starting now, what would you do it like? And yeah, so with the comfort book, I thought, well, this is like my 21st book. So I've written a lot of books, had a lot of books reviewed. And normally, even if it's a good review, like with The Midnight Library or some of my other novels, the bit they won't like is the bit which is either sentimental or me stepping out of the narrative, talking to the reader, being a little bit philosophical, being hopeful, being a little bit, inverted commas, Instagrammy, or, how they see it. And I thought, well, here's a book which is all that, it's
Yeah.
all the bit. But reviewers normally say, oh, I didn't like that bit. The story was okay, but I didn't like it when he stepped outside. And this is all stepping outside. This is all, my thoughts.
Yeah.
And so I was anticipating a lot of criticism, and I have had some, but to be honest, the response has been generally very warm. And I've reached a point in my career, and it's a total privilege, but it has took quite a long time to get to this point where even though on a personal level, being a kind of sensitive, occasionally thin-skinned, stroppy author, it will get to me.
Mhm.
But in terms of career terms, I've kind of got my reader base now who know what I do.
Right.
And there will be people who don't like it, and there'll be people who do like it, like with anything, books are so subjective. So it doesn't impact me in any real sense. It's just I think because sorry, I'm turning this into a ramble, but I think because when I was younger, I was I was kind of a cynical young man myself. So I would look down on happy endings and optimism, anything like that. This was before I had depression. And then when, weirdly, sounds ridiculous to say, but my experience of mental illness, which was in my case was panic disorder and depression mainly, with a little bit of OCD as well, my recovery from that strangely made me optimistic and hopeful and wanting to seek out that. Basically, the short reason for that is because when I had depression, I had this total pessimism. And to recover, I had to sort of actively resist that. And I actually began to see pessimism and cynicism and a cynical approach to the world as part of my illness, and also fundamentally inauthentic in itself, because it was telling me things all the time which weren't true. At the age of 24, I was convinced I wouldn't be here at 25. I'm now 46. So you slowly learn that actually that voice of complete pessimism is as false as any optimism, but at least optimism has a use. So since that time, I've tried to, not a sort of rainbows and unicorns kind of optimism, but a sort of authentic, from the dark place kind of optimism. That sort of like defiance, I suppose. Yeah, and the comfort books, all that. But I don't really. I'm at the point now where I've had most of the reviews anyway, so I'm sort of feeling a bit like I don't really care now. It is what it is. So long as so long as you as the writer are happy with how you've done, you just like, yeah, okay, that's good, done it, on with the next one. But yeah, no, it's going down well, and I'm pleased, I think, yes, but it's always a neurotic process being a writer.
Well, I love it. And I appreciate not only your positivity, but also your realness in your writing and also in your Instagram posts. So thank you for being so transparent with everything. I think you're one of few people, and for that reason, one of my favorite accounts to follow because of just all of that. So
Oversharing, letting it all out, and
yeah.
just being a mess. I am learning, Ashley. I'm going to try and get some boundaries because I've treated social media for the last 10 years like one long therapy session. Like I'm forgetting people are actually watching.
Well, that's
And
what I was going
then
to ask. Is it therapeutic for you?
it can be. I mean, actually, I know people are funny about Instagram, but Instagram for me is kind of my safe space, really, because I have a very warm response on Instagram. Twitter, obviously, being Twitter, is a different
Right.
thing. My problem with Twitter is I was on and very active on Twitter for years when no one followed me,
Mhm.
and then suddenly lots of people followed me, and I was still using it the same way. And obviously, I didn't really see myself as having a platform or having any kind of responsibility.
Right.
And so, certainly in my country, I was positioned a little bit as a mental health figurehead. Or, I would never call myself that, but like you'd get introduced as mental health ambassador or
Mhm.
spokesperson. I see myself as a novelist and a writer, but occasionally, if you're talking about mental health, anyone in that space would get called that. So it comes with a kind of responsibility, which I felt at the time I hadn't signed up for. And I was still putting any old opinion out there, which I'd probably change my mind on 10 minutes later. And it'd be just like, 2016, when the world felt like it was on fire, I was just getting into arguments left, right, and center. And I was a bit of a mess on the internet. I was a little bit, a
It's
little bit, I wasn't saying anything scandalous, but just my attitude, and it's just, I
It's
had to sort of
funny.
work on that.
It's interesting. Like I'll look back on my like which I barely use Facebook anymore, but I'll look back on
Yeah,
my Facebook status updates because sometimes they'll remind you. I'm like, why would I say that? Ew. It's just
yeah,
that weird, cringy moment. But
yeah, totally.
okay, so let's get a little,
Facebook, yeah, Facebook's a weird one. I mean, I think everyone still has Facebook accounts, don't they? But they're kind of like this graveyard of 2011 when they were.
right, exactly, like non-essential. And also
And but you occasionally go on and see an elderly relative, but it's
right.
kind of like the quiet room in a wedding where you just
Yeah,
sort of,
exactly. Okay, I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the Midnight Library because I loved it so very much. And for me, I'm someone who can always fall into that hole of what would my life have been like had I done this, had I moved here, had I made this decision. And reading this book was this amazing paradigm shift for me to appreciate the present. So thank you. So I want to know what inspired Nora's story, or stories, should I say?
Yeah, it's very interesting, the Midnight Library, because the first draft of the Midnight Library, Nora was male. There's a male central character. Um, and I knew I had a problem with this character because I kept on changing the name. And I feel like when you've got a main protagonist and the name keeps on changing, that's a bad sign. That's a bad omen. And the reason I couldn't see Nora um, when it wasn't Nora and it was a male was because it was almost too close to me. I was almost writing myself, and in a way, the Midnight Library came out. It sounds stupid to say about a totally fantastical novel about the multiverse and parallel lives, but to say it's autobiographical. But in a way, there was a lot of me. There's a lot of me in the Midnight Library, not necessarily literally, but in terms of emotionally and thoughts and regrets and stuff like that. A lot of that me is in there. But when I was writing this male central character, it was too me. It was too. I couldn't see it. For a character to be a character, it's hard sometimes to see yourself as a character,
Right.
and you need something that's graspable and perceivable on the page. And so I thought, how can I make this person not me? So there was the gender switch, age switch, name switch, everything. So it was visibly not me. And then the moment it was overtly not me, um, it became somehow easier. Obviously you still have that challenge of being a male writer writing a female protagonist and all the bazillion pitfalls you can make. And I'm lucky that my most brutal reader is the person I live with, who's my wife. So she has no fear about telling me where I'm going wrong or being embarrassingly male. But yeah, so it came from really when I was in my 20s and I was ill with panic disorder and depression. And the flavor of that for me, other than the sort of physical and mental symptoms, a lot of the flavor was about regrets. It was about wishing, you know, because I was just kept on sort of thinking in this attitude of like extreme self-pity, which wasn't my fault. It was just kind of symptomatic of the condition. In this attitude of extreme self-pity, I would think, how did I end up here? What mistakes have I made in my life where I hate myself so much, where my self-esteem so low, where I'm feeling this dreadful, where I've been so unhealthy to end up like this? And so I'd always fantasize about different lives and imagine better lives. And that was the flavor of my mental illness for quite a while. And similarly, the recovery and therapy and self-therapy a lot of the time was about acceptance and about imperfection. And I realized I'd been very much a perfectionist in my early adulthood, and, you know, set the bar so high for myself and was a never meeting the standards. I was never popular enough. I was never good looking enough. I was never, you know, didn't have the job I wanted. Everything, you know, all these silly things. And to recover from that, I had to just really embrace messiness and imperfection and imperfect feelings and imperfect thoughts, and realizing that those things don't define me. So a lot of the theme of the Midnight Library stems from my own recovery and my own sort of ideas of self-acceptance. I can never remember the exact point I got the aha eureka moment of the library.
Mhm.
I knew for years I wanted to write about parallel lives, you know, almost since I started writing fiction. And I'm going, you know, I go back a reasonable while, back to like 2004. So I probably had the idea for a parallel life novel around 2006, 2007. But I thought there's so much good stuff out there, so many stories people know, not just in books, but in film, that involve parallel lives. I thought, I can't write this until I get a hook, something that feels new, a new way of doing it. And so whenever I got the Midnight Library idea, which was probably about 2 years ago now, I thought, okay, I've got it, because it came with the title. The idea kind of came with the title. And, you know, if you've got a strong enough concept and you've got a title, you think, right, okay, I've got a novel now. I haven't written a word, but I can do this. There has to be a book called The Midnight Library, and that concept, you know, because you don't, especially as you get a little bit older, you really value ideas, and you realize they don't come along that often. So it's not just, I think being a writer, sometimes it's almost being quite opportunistic with your own thoughts. It's about realizing, I feel like most people have a lot of different thoughts in the day, but it's more about fishing which ones actually have something to them. And I thought, okay, yeah, that could have something. And then I wrote it, and it was a nightmare to write. Right, even though it's quite a short book, it's quite sort of easy reading, I suppose. It was a nightmare to write, because structurally, to work it out in a way that wouldn't just be like a short story collection, but actually have some kind of momentum while she's still going sideways, through different jobs and lives, which I had to research, even if it was a super short section. I had to research as if I was doing a whole novel on, for instance, her being a glaciologist in the Arctic. I knew nothing about that, so I had to do a lot of research. And so it was kind of a stressful write and edit, but all the time I thought, oh yeah, no, I was feeling good about it. I didn't know it'd become like this thing, which it's now become, which I'm still sort of processing. But yeah, it was a challenging write, which is another reason why I probably wanted to write something like the comfort book straight after, which was no structure,
Yeah. The
free, and
opposite.
yeah.
But the Midnight Library, I love that it's so different in the sense that it's fiction, but it also has all of these very real elements and lessons, and that that your book, and then also what was the other, Jodi Picoult's The Book of Two Ways.
Yeah.
Those were the two over the last year that I was really like, oh my god, I love that these are both fiction, but like I'm feeling so much from both
Yes.
of them that are,
Well, Jodie was sent a copy of Midnight Library, and she messaged me straight away and she said, I've written, she didn't say I've written the same book, but she
yeah,
says I've written something that's, you know, about exactly the same sort of themes, and we're coming out at almost exactly the same time. It's so strange how those things happen. But I think both those books actually, yeah, obviously we didn't know that what was going to happen in 2020.
right,
And I think, I can't speak for Jodie, but I finished the edits of the Midnight Library, well, most of them by the end of 2019.
okay,
So I think there was one final edit where COVID was starting to happen. And because I can remember thinking, should I mention pandemics? Should I mention coronavirus? And I thought, no, because I actually wrote this in 2019, and you know, the world was in such a state of flux at that point. We didn't know what was going to happen. I'm so glad I didn't turn it into a pandemic topical book, because it just becomes about that then.
right,
And you know, but I think thematically, the pandemic, it chimes with people, because people were suddenly having these little philosophical existential
of
moments and
course,
reassessing their life and thinking about regrets, thinking about where they are in life, having a new sort of rethink
yeah.
of where they want to be and what they want to do. So I think, you know, I wouldn't say that was a silver lining, because I'd obviously prefer the pandemic not to have happened. But I think, I mean, I have no idea how it would have done in 2020 without that. But I noticed a lot of readers were saying
It was just what
it
we
fit their
needed.
mood. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Completely change of topic, but A Boy Called Christmas. Tell me a little bit about what the adaptation process has been like. And I imagine it's interesting being a children's book adapted to the screen as opposed to a
Yes.
full-length novel. So were you involved? And if so, how involved are you with the adaptation?
Yeah. Well, I didn't write the script. Basically, A Boy Called Christmas, for those that don't know, is my a children's book I wrote a few years ago before the Midnight Library, um, about Father Christmas, Santa, as a boy. My son Lucas had asked me before going to bed. He'd said, what was Father Christmas, as we say in Britain? What was Father Christmas like as a child?" And I didn't have a quick, ready dad answer
Uh-huh.
at the time, but I was just thinking, I just had my writer hat thinking, oh, that's a good idea for that's a good idea for a story, origin story, a sort of slightly, you know, it's not Saint Nicholas, it's very much the sort of secular Christmas story, but it was great fun to write. But then it was optioned for film, and it was quite exciting because there was an auction. But the auction was a bit stressful because I had to make a very difficult decision about who to go with. So I, like, you know, turning down Disney, that you don't do that every day, and things like that. And also, to make it even more complicated, my publisher, the boss of my publisher in the UK, great man called Jamie Bing, he was he was associated with Benedict Cumberbatch's company, and working on another of my books called How to Stop Time, on something else. And so he was saying, oh, you have to go with, so I was getting lots of voices. My agent was saying something else, and I went, being stubborn and difficult, with someone completely different to these people, and getting a lot of pressure. And, you know, it was not, you know, it was like Wall Street or something. It was kind of like lots of phone calls and shouting and intense. And I went with a company called Blueprint, who have done lots of films, Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, Exotic Marigold Hotel, various other things. And I'd worked with them. And so I was going with the people I knew. And also I was going with the people I thought were going to actually make it, and make it well.
Right.
Because I've been around the block enough times to know that if you sell the film rights to a book, that does not mean you're retiring and flying to Malibu that afternoon, and
Okay,
you're
great.
just, you know,
Yeah.
it's a bit of a, there's lots of companies that option a lot of books,
Right.
and so I went with a company that had a good ratio of, they only optioned things that they wanted to make. Obviously, there were things that fell by the wayside, but they really, really were proactive. It wasn't like a kind of Disney situation where they optioned hundreds of things. So I went with them, and a script happened. They asked me if I wanted to write the script. I said no, because I'd just done some screenwriting, which had been a disaster, and I'd wasted about 2 years on a script that never got made. I found the whole process a bit stressful, because unlike with a novel where you have one editor and there's a bit of back and forth, with this, it's literally impossible sometimes with a screenplay to please everyone, because you have a producer, you have a director, you have all kinds of different people, and so I found it stressful. So, and I also was thinking, it's probably not going to happen. I went with the most likely choice, but it's still probably not going to happen. So I'll leave it, and I took a total back seat. And but having said that, they've been very inclusive of me. They flew us out. This was pre-COVID. They flew us out in 2019 to Prague, where it was being filmed, and they'd built this whole elf village. Got to see people like Maggie Smith on the set. Actually, Maggie Smith, that was in London, because this was January last year, before
Okay.
everything went crazy. They'd shut down this whole street in Pimlico, which is a quite smart, posh bit of London, and no, Primrose Hill. Sorry, Primrose Hill, and it was late January, but they'd filled it with Christmas lights and everything else, and just totally surreal. And because I hadn't been that involved with it, I could just enjoy it. There wasn't any pressure on me. I was a bit distant to it, so I felt a bit like Charlie Bucket in Willy Wonka's factory with my golden ticket, and I felt like I'd won a competition. I
Yeah.
felt like, it didn't feel like it was mine. I just felt like I was. And I've seen the film, and it's really good. And in America, it's going to be out in Netflix later this year. In the UK, different TV and cinema options. But so it's exciting, and I
Has your
can't.
son seen it?
My son has seen it, and my son is in it.
Oh, he
My
is.
He's in it. He and my daughter, they actually asked me if I wanted like a cameo, just like
Right.
and I thought, you know what, they don't need a bold 46-year-old
Oh,
elf
you
in the
should
back.
have done it. See, that's like for me, I always wanted to be a famous movie star, like on the back
Okay,
burner. So if
there's
I
still
ever,
time, Ashley. There's
oh,
still
totally,
time.
totally. So if I ever write a book, and it gets picked up and
Hmm.
becomes a movie, I will 100% be in that. But I can see if you don't have that desire.
Well, yeah, I felt already. It would have felt greedy, but they were already doing the film, and so. But I did use that opportunity to say my kids would
Yeah.
really like to be in it. So they got in the elf outfits, and we're not talking.
So
I
cool.
mean, one of my favorite films of all time is Will Ferrell elf, but these elves are kind of they're not in green. The director had one instruction to the costume designer. He said no green. So it's all like these Scandinavian. It's almost like if you went to Scandinavia and you actually discovered real elves, what they'd look like. And anyway, there's this elf school scene where my son and daughter are both there with their elf ears and in their elf costumes, and my son, he really hates it now, because he's 13,
Uh-huh.
Mr. Cool, and the film, he had to have his hair curled, and he's
Uh-huh.
got these little. He looks adorable, but he doesn't want to look adorable. He wants to look
Wants
super
to be
cool.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, so, and he gets to say a line. He says, um, an elf guard rushes in and say, "Are there any humans in here?" And he says, "No." And my daughter gets to scream, and so they were very excited. But they did actually realize that being on a film set can be quite a boring, repetitive
Mhm.
thing. You get the first sort of hour of whoa, and then it's like, oh my goodness, you have
A
to
lot.
keep repeating.
By the way, are
Very
they
fun.
like the most positive people having you as their dad?
Well, no, they just, yeah. I mean, they're positive people, but not because they've got me as their dad. I mean, I'm just a bit What I'm just an embarrassing dad. I think I'm just like, I'm just an embarrassing dad. Yeah, when I'm writing a children's book, they're my first readers.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
and they definitely tell me. Normally, they tell me I'm being a bit. They don't. My son especially, he likes funny books.
Uh-huh.
So very often I'll kill someone off early in a story, and I'll say he doesn't like that. So they give constructive feedback. But yeah, I think. I mean, they're homeschooled. Our children are homeschooled,
Okay.
so we have a lot of time together. And I've just been around town with my son and the dog, and someone recognized me from uh, not from the book. She had read my books, but she recognized me from the internet, which is always a bit weird. And my son just thinks it's just so embarrassing when people come up to me. But yeah, anyway, yeah, I have no idea. I think I'm just embarrassed about that.
Can we say what's next? I always hate to ask what's next when you
Yeah,
have all this stuff that's just happened and happening. But if you could give us a preview, is there another book in the works?
sure. Um, yeah, I am working on a new novel for grown-ups. I don't know what it's called yet. I was torn between two different ideas, so I'm not 100% if I've landed on the idea or whether I'm going to switch again, because I have been known. At the moment, there was one idea which was very sci-fi about flowers, where there would be these strange new species of flowers that would appear everywhere on Earth, and they're changing people's behavior. So like a horror novel in reverse, because rather than changing people in dreadful ways, people would, things would start to heal. People would discover empathy. But it was almost like, yeah, reverse Stephen King, where transformations were happening, but people weren't understanding it, and strange things were happening. And it was basically this other planet was seeing that Earth was in a bit of a mess, and they'd sort of hacked into the code of life on Earth and were creating these flowers. So I still like that. But at the moment, I'm having a lot of fun writing a kind of sequel to Hansel and Gretel, where Hansel and Gretel in the 1300s are cursed, and they're turned into trees, beech trees, for 500 years, 600 years. And they wake up in the 1980s in Germany, and then they set a Trevor Ember, and it's set in partly in Britain, partly in Germany, partly in America, and it's between the 1300s, 1980s, present day. Very strange. I'm liking the strangeness of it. I'm liking
I love
escaping
that.
into sort of fairy tales, and I feel like with Hansel and Gretel, it's kind of fits my work in the sense that Hansel and Gretel are the most, if you think of a fairy tale character with a traumatic childhood or a traumatic past, you can't get much more traumatic than witch trying to eat your brother,
Right.
and all of that. So there's a lot of that, a lot of kind of fairy tale therapy that I'm enjoying about it. So we will see.
Right.
But at the moment, I'm doing a sort of Gretel-esque
Well,
story.
we'll follow you closely. Now, if that ever gets adapted, that was my first theater role, like big
Oh, really?
community theater role. Yes, I was Gretel. I was like 13 years old, and that was
Oh, were you?
yeah. So
Okay, well, yes,
let me
that's good. Ashley, I will keep you in mind
perfect.
if should we're jumping ahead a little bit, but
Right,
I
like
will
write the
definitely.
book first, then let's get it adapted, and then give me a call if I'm not too old by then. It was so lovely talking to you. Oh, and happy belated birthday! Your birthday just
Oh,
passed.
thank you. Yeah, I know. I'm such a, I'm a 46-year-old man, so I should be more sort of dignified about birthdays. But I love birthdays.
I love birthday.
I'm such a birthday person. I'm very lucky, actually. Andrea, my wife, she's big into birthdays. She just loves planning birthdays. So for the whole family, we get a treat. I mean, it puts pressure on me for her birthday,
Yeah.
because I'm a bit disorganized, but I do put the extra effort in. So yeah, I had a very nice time, and I felt like 8 years old because I got a bike.
Oh, nice.
And so I've been out riding my bike, like I'm like,
I love it. And
in
you
the
share a
19.
birthday with Tom Cruise, right?
Yeah,
Does he follow you?
me
Like,
and
are
Tom.
you guys, have you talked to him?
We don't have a. No, I love Tom
So
Cruise though.
many
I mean, I don't.
celebrities follow
I'm
you.
not
I
talking
wouldn't be
about.
surprised.
And I don't, as a film star, I watched Jerry Maguire recently, and I thought, I do like the Mission Impossible films, but I kind of miss those old 90s movies where Tom Cruise would, he'd just be on the phone,
Yeah.
and he'd be so intense. Like you just get so into it. And, he can, I mean, if you think about Jerry Maguire, a film about a sports agent, on paper, it's not very exciting or dynamic.
Right.
But it's just so good. I really unabashedly love Jerry Maguire. So I do like the Mission Impossible films, but I wish he'd do a sort of Rain Man or a
Yes.
Jerry Maguire or something like
I
that.
would take that.
Tom
Which,
Cruise
let's
acting.
bring it back to the comfort book. You give a list of movie
Yes.
recommendations. So make sure everybody get the comfort book, read all of it, read all of Matt's books. Matt, it was so lovely speaking with you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Ashley.
so much for your time.
That was great. Love that.